What will be the destiny of the protagonist? How will the entanglement between the protagonist and the mysterious father develop? Can the protagonist defeat the evil mother? Dive into a world of werewolves and witches. Subscribe now. Chapter 12, A Little Power. I see a young boy running across the field with a kite. He was laughing as he approached a woman sitting with an equally younger girl that appeared few years older than he was. "Mama, look at my kite fly," he jumped up ecstatically. His mother laughed. It was a beautiful scene. "Reed, you are running too much. You will get hurt," she warned. I was in shock. This was Reed. How? I studied the boy's facial features and recognized their similarities. It was truly Reed. "I am fine, Mama. I am strong just like Papa. Come on, Hannah, play with me," he giggles and runs away. The young girl gets up and runs after him. "Wait for me, Reed," and I wake up. My eyes shot wide open and I realized that it had been a dream, rather. A vision. Reed was fast asleep beside me. I could not believe it. My powers actually worked. I try to tap into his memories. Though it is wrong, I want to really know if I am gaining any of my magic back. "I am sorry, Reed." I lift my hands across his body without touching him and I close my eyes. I wait for something to happen, but nothing. I chant a few spells silently, but was the same thing. I open my eyes back and sigh. I was about giving up when my hand mistakenly touched Reed's back end. "I am leaving. I turned 23 last week and still nothing. She is obviously not in this pack," and in the neighboring ones, Reed yelled at a male that appeared twice his age as he stepped out of a house while the aged man stood at the doorway. "You can attend the mating dance. What is coming up this weekend?" he reasoned, "Father. That would make it my 5th mating dance and still nothing. She is obviously not attending those crappy events," he spat, facing his father. A woman came out as well from the worry of it in on her face. She looked just like the woman in my dream, Reed's mother, but much older and still beautiful. "Please, Reed, we worry for you," she said with so much sadness in her voice. "I will be fine, Mama. I will find her and come back with her." He kissed his mother's cheeks and he left. "What are you doing?" A voice snapped me out of my vision. "Nothing." I flinched immediately, returning back to my right position. He narrowed his eyes at me. He knew I was hiding something, but here I was acting like a frightened young woman, a side no one has ever seen, nor even Fia. "I will be fine, Mama. I will find her and come back with her," I repeated his words from the vision. His eyes shot up immediately in surprise. "How do you know?" he questioned. "I saw it," I said sadly. "The mate bond really affects him. He has been waiting for it for so long, and he got stuck with me at a bond that we do not understand." Oh, his eyes held pain for a second before shifting back to normal. "Do you now have your powers again?" "It is not fully restored," I responded. He sighed. "Okay. You should go back to sleep. There is still much hours to go before morning," he stated and laid back to his sleeping position again. After gawking at his back for a while, I lay down back again, but sleep does not take me easily. Not even Reed's rhythmic heartbeat that usually worked. He was asleep, but the vision rested at the front of my mind, preventing me from sleeping. Was I too harsh on him? Those thoughts ran through my mind. I was worried about the possible outcome of the bond being false, that I forget that I was not the only one going through it. Somehow we were both stuck in it together. Even if he found his potential true mate in the future, he might also be affected by the fact that he was once pushing for this bond. Reed was a good man. He would feel guilty for leading me on. I stay there pondering on several thoughts until eventually sleep envelopes me. Reed was not in bed when I woke up. It was the first time this was happening since our sleeping arrangements was put in place, and a part of me had learned to get used to seeing his face the first thing in the morning. He was indeed attractive to gaze upon, making it a good moment, though we're still in our good morning stage. I got off the bed and set the ground facing the open window and mediated a little bit. The memories of Reed's life lingered in my thoughts. He had good parents. He had a happy life growing up, and I was happy to know that. I was happy to know that he had not suffered growing up. Sadly, it was this bond between us that was punishing him now. After I was done, I cleaned myself up in the bathroom and got dressed before heading down the stairs. As usual, the three of them were seated in the dining table eating. laughing, making snarky comments. "You are awake," Mistress Via beamed when she saw me. I smiled at her before sitting beside her. She serves me my food and I mouth a thank you. "I have gotten a bit of my power," I announced. "Oh, really?" Nadine voiced with astonishment laced in her voice. "That is wonderful, Mistress." Thea cheered. "I assumed Reed would have informed you," I commented. Nadine turned her gaze at him and narrowed her eyes for a second before turning her attention back to me. "What are you able to do?" she asks. "I can see glimpses of people's past only if I come in contact. That is all I know for now," I answered. "I think that world has stopped sucking your magic, but I fear it would be temporary." "The Order has not yet been able to make contact or enter the world," Nadine revealed, though. "But I have more information. My sister Giselle has little information about the Blue Bond. It is quite tragic, actually. You are not the first of your kind to have a bond you share with Reed," she added. I blinked. "How come I do not know of this then?" I asked. "The story is quite tragic and the witches try not to speak about it. Thelma was just like you, actually, only that her mother, Frigg, was the witch, not the werewolf. So she was well taken care of by her mother's family when Frigg died birthing her. She discovered the bond with the werewolf, but he was an alpha and saw her as an abomination, so he killed her, and the alpha got missing shortly after. No one knew what happened to him till today," she explained. Reed got up from his seat immediately. There was a frown on his face. "I am leaving," he announced, and immediately left the room. "He is angry at what the alpha did. He feels ashamed," Nadine revealed. "He shouldn't be," I responded. "Evil is in every kind of creature. It is not his fault. My mother was a werewolf and she was good," I added. I stood up and trailed after him. I found Reed by the front porch. He was sitting quietly staring across the street. I sat beside him. "How does someone feel drawn in a beautiful way to a person and still kill that person?" he said with bitterness. "People fear what they do not understand," I replied with a sad smile. "I do not fear you." "I know," I chuckled. "You stayed. And you have helped me, though I have been overbearing." He chuckles. "I want to see it through to the end. I do not want regrets." "Your parents raised you well. You were a happy child growing up," I said. "I was contented. My parents tried their best, and it was enough," he responded with a smile. That is good. Chapter 13. The Luna was taken. Loud banging could be heard from the front door before the break of dawn. Reed and I shot up immediately from the bed. We both shared a confused look before we made our way out of the room. One thought for sure was meant to through both of our minds. Who could that be? Nadine and Fia were already at the hallway when we came out of the room, and we all made it down the stairs together. Reed was the one to open the door, and a tall, bulky man appeared. There was worry crease on his forehead, and I knew something had gone wrong. "Jacob, what are you doing here?" Reed was the one to ask. He appeared to be well acquainted with the stranger. I tried to find out who he was, but my powers would not let me. I had only regained a little. I would need physical touch to be able to get some information, but at the end there would be no need for that. "The Luna was taken," the stranger announced, his eyes on Reed. Reed was from the Blood Sun pack. Alpha Caden's pack. That would mean that it was Luna Louisiana that was kidnapped. "What happened?" I asked, while Reed was completely frozen. It was his Luna. They shared bond with each other. If anything were to happen to her, they would also be affected. It would be the same story with Luna Freya. A sad and devastating story. "Good morning, priestess," he greeted with a bow. "I apologize for barging in at this hour. My Alpha and the Luna were attacked on their way back from the palace. It was the plagued wolves. There were more than 5 this time," he revealed. My eyes widened in shock. Whoever was creating those creatures was forming an army. "We have searched for 3 days now, but no leads. We sought out your help, but your campsite was in ruins. The pack doctor, Hannah, informed us that Reed was with you and gave us this address. That is why I am here," he revealed the more. I seen Nadine glare at Reed for revealing her house to the werewolves. She had no bad blood with them, but they were not exactly friends. Most witches try to keep away from werewolves, unless in difficult situations. "I will come with you," I announced. I might not be strong enough to fight, but I think my magic would work for a location spell. Nadine pulled me to the side away from them. You are not really thinking of helping. You are not strong enough, she pointed out. Just because you were able to get a little power does not mean you are back on your feet again. We don't fully understand what this means yet. If there is a fight, you will die. She held me by my arm. I will not involve myself in their fights. They need my help. She frowned. And you can tell them no. You can tell them that you have lost your powers. I chuckled. I never realized that you still care about me this much, Nadine. I eased. She rolled her eyes for a second before it regained its serious form once more. They may have no one to turn to. The moon goddess favors this alpha. Even if I try to reject it, she will make me help them. She rolled her eyes for the second time. You and these werewolves. The moon goddess has been silent so far. She has not responded to any of your questions yet. You want to please her. I stare at her, speechless for a second or two. She was completely right. It was as though the goddess had turned her back on me. But I feel her somehow. I feel her watching, though she has been silent. I understand you, Nadine, but I will go. There could be answers there. These all started with that Luna, I reasoned. And it was the truth. There might be something there that may answer some of our questions, even if it is just one. She sighed. Fine. But I will help you. I had no wish of stepping into a werewolf pack, but I will go with you. Maybe I will lend you my magic when I am there. Your kindness would have its own reward, I smiled. And she rolled her eyes for the third time. The run back was a quick one. I had to ride on Reed's back, and Nadine, after much complaining, had to ride on FIA's back, though the wolf who came to inform us had offered his. He later introduced himself as Neil. I am glad. You could come to our rescue. Alpha Caden was the one to talk when we stopped on the doorsteps of the pack house. He seemed to have been waiting for us. His appearance was nothing to write home about. He looked broken, yet he appeared to be trying to keep himself all together. I don't need magic to know what must be running through his mind. Confusion, frustration, fear, and most of all, history might be repeating itself. I will try to be of help the best way that I can, I responded. He gave me a curt nod before he led me into the pack house and to his office. What do you need? He asks in anticipation, his eagerness almost choking. I understood how he felt. Life had given him a second chance, and slowly he might be losing it. A piece of her belonging, I responded. He nods his head and waved at his beta James. James leaves, scurried out of the room immediately. I hear you and Reed are connected, he mutters with curiosity for his pack member well-being despite his own challenge. His pack members were still his concern. Yes, I swiftly replied, we have not fully understood the nature of our bond. But Reed has been of great help to me. Reed glanced at me, giving me a complicated look. I know what I was doing. Regardless of anything, Reed does deserve lots of credits. He is the reason why I was still here. Reed has always been a good man. Dedicated as well, Alpha Caden commented. He turned his attention to Nadine, raising an eyebrow. Nadine had a slight frown on her face as he stared at her. She really did not like werewolves. Faye and Reed have only been exceptions. I am Nadine and I am here to help, she said with a smug look. Fine, Alpha Caden gritted his teeth. I am guessing the feelings are mutual between them. I was about to properly introduce them when James came back into the room. With a piece of clothing in his hands, he hands it over to his alpha, who then hands it over to me. I received the dress and stood up, closing my eyes. Then I wait. Seconds passed, but I do not feel a thing. This clothes was hers, but she was not bonded to this piece of material. It was of no value. Even if my powers was still weak, I would have felt something. But I still had to try. Nadine, come, I gestured. She literally almost dragged herself towards me that I sent her a slight glare. She placed her hands on me and I feel a surge of power enter me. I try again to link myself to it, but still nothing. The cloth would be useless. This cannot work, I announced. Caden stared at me with surprise. We need a place that she is bonded. A place I can feel her energy strongly, I suggested. I do not understand, Caden responded. I sighed. I closed my eyes and tried to remember something about her. Caden was in a panic, but I wasn't. And a life was a sad one. Tragic one. The dungeon in her former pack will have a lot of her energy, but we can't go there because the dungeon was also filled with too much pain. The meadow. The thought popped into my mind. The connected with her wolf there. She is bonded to that place. Take me to the meadow, I said when I finally opened my eyes. The meadow was just like in my vision. Completely breathtaking. Even Nadine was gawking. I gestured at Nadine to follow me, and we both made our way to the lake. We entered into the water. Water was a connecting force on its own. It would help me connect to Luna Anna. I held Nadine's hand and take some of her magic again, and I start chanting. It was already late in the night, and I hoping that the Luna would be asleep. It was the only way. I would be able to pass my message and know where she truly was. Her unconscious body will help me roam the grounds. And thankfully she was asleep, and I enter her dream, manipulating it to take her to the meadow. I watch her walk down to the river and stare at the water and at her reflection. She cannot feel me yet. She stretches out her hands to touch the water, and I take the opportunity to appear before her in the water. Caden is looking for you. He doesn't want you to give up on him, I spoke. She smiles at me as her eyes lit up. Williams is responsible for everything. He is partly a wizard. Find Alpha Samuel. He knows how to destroy his kind, she answers swiftly. Of course, I answered, and I ended the dream for her. I had gotten what I needed. I break the link between Nadine. We both came out of the water. Alpha Caden rushed over to us immediately. I placed my hand on his temple and give him the images to find her before saying, find Alpha Samuel first. He will give you the dagger that you need to help kill Williams. Williams. Alpha Caden looked stunned, but I was stunned as well. Williams was like me. We shared a heritage, but he was evil. All this while I searched for the dagger. Alpha Samuel had it. Yes, he is like me. I reveal he is the one that took your Luna. He was the one that created the plagued wolves. Nadine stared at me with her eyes wide open. You should leave now, I tell Alpha Caden. Something was wrong. Something was shifting in the air. Thank you, he nods, and he takes his leave with James. When they are out of sight, I feel it, and I collapse to the ground with a loud scream. And I black out. Chapter 14, The Truth One. It had been a while since I was in this dreadful world that I have forgotten most of the feeling I felt when I was there. Fear. This time was different, though. I wasn't in chains, and so far there was none of that magic-sucking ghastly creatures in sight. So far. Let's end this now. I yelled out, only for my words to echo back. I freely walked through the endless days of the forest, but there was nothing. No creature. Nothing. Until... You look just like your mother. I heard a voice coming from my front, but there was no one in sight. Who are you? I yelled into the nothingness of the forest. I am your father. It was a whisper into my ears from behind me, and I immediately froze up. I could feel someone behind me breathing against my neck, claiming to be my father. The father that was non-existent. I do not have a father, I said through gritted teeth before I turned to face the stranger. But you are wrong. Everyone has a father. Either dead or alive, he said. He was dressed in a long black robe, and he had long raven hair. His face was incredibly pale, and his cheeks were sunken as though he had been starved. Still, he looked attractive and young. How could he be my father? I eyed him strangely as I made up to keep myself at high alert in case of an attack. Which one are? Dead or alive? I asked as my eyes never left his somewhat dark orbs. Neither, he responded. W what? I asked in confusion. What did he mean by that? I studied him carefully, my guard still at its highest. I know you have questions, he stated casually. Follow me, he added as he turned around and walked into the abyss. I contemplated following him for a second or two before I did. It was quite hard keeping up with him. It did not even appear like he was even walking like I was. It was like he was gliding in the air, and the long robe he was adorned in was proving my suspicions to be true. After what seemed like endless walk, he stopped abruptly before saying, my cottage is over there. He pointed at the small house that appeared to be seated a few feet away. He continued walked, and I followed behind him. I know this was stupid of me, but maybe I would be able to finally get some answers about what was really going on with my life. We entered the cottage and I am completely stunned at the interior. The cottage looked small from the outside, but on the inside, it looked like a palace hall. The clicks of shoes along the tiled marble floor proved me wrong on my hypothesis of him actually gliding in the forest. Maybe he was in the forest, and it was now his feet was just touching the ground. But that was the least of my problems. I needed answers, and I was sure to get it from him. He sat comfortably on his golden throne, while I stared at him. He looked like a king. His once sunken cheeks looked even fuller now. How was he my father? We looked nothing alike, and as though he was reading my mind, he said, "I know you are wondering why we do not share any resemblance. I must admit, I am quite disappointed. Outsiders would assume that your mother did all the work. But Ingrid has always been a strong character." Strong character. I was feeling slightly offended about how he was behaving like my mother had just been nothing but a house that had sheltered his offspring. And it disgusted me. My mother was more than that. She was my mother, and she was a good woman. Certainly, it is not my intention to offend you in any way. I tend to let my intrusive thoughts win over me regularly. It is something I am working on. He smiled from ears to ears. You are neither dead nor alive. More of dead to me. Don't you think it is too late to be working on your character? I said through gritted teeth. He burst out into a fit of laughter. You are quite bold. It is something I expect from my daughter. Power befits you, my lovely daughter. I am not your daughter. I screamed out in rage. My fingers itches to walk over to him and strike him across the face. He might be involved in my existence on this earth, but he was certainly not my father. A real father would not have deceived a young woman and destroyed her life and her reputation. He scrunched up his anger in anger. He literally jumped off of the chair and marched towards me until we were facing each other with few inches separating us. He was quite tall, but not too still. Strangely, I could feel his breath against my temple. How was that even possible? He held me by my hand tightly while I struggled to free myself from him. What the hell do you think you are doing? I am showing you the truth, he gritted against his teeth. Then the ballroom began to transform until we were in the forest, but this was not the dark forest on the outside of the cottage. This was a real forest. What are we doing here? I asked out of curiosity as he released me from his grasp. My eyes were on him, trying to study his facial expressions for a clue of his true intentions, but I was failing miserably. His expression was straight, almost emotional as I was about to ask him the same question again since he refused to answer the first time, but I stopped when I saw a young girl run by cackling. She falls to the ground still giggling, and I was about to approach her and help but I stopped again when I see a young boy slightly older than her appear, and he said those 5 words that completely shook me. You play so much, Ingrid, he said as he helped her up the ground. Her body fell on him as he held her by the waist. She stared intensely at him as though his eyes were captivating to her. And he stared at her with equal intensity as well. Ingrid. That was my mother's name. For a second she faces my direction before looking back at the boy. And I totally froze up. She shared a striking resemblance with me. Her hair was also the same shade as mine. This was my mother. But who was that boy? That is me, my supposed father responded. Matt Spidey. My fated mate. What splashed around me and my wind spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. My eyes widened in shock. He did not respond, but his gaze was returned to the young couple. Everyone in the village says that. I thought you loved that about me. You said my rebellious nature intrigued you. My mother said the last part with so much seductive ends in her voice. I love your rebellious spirit. What normal wolf girl would choose to get entangled with a wizard? He responded cheekily. Crazy me. It was difficult to resist your charms and your dashing looks. Alexander Erickson, she smiled at him widely before placing a kiss on his lips. He held the back of her neck, deepening the kiss. I turned to my supposed father. Is that your name? Alexander Erickson. I questioned. Yes, he breathed. He knew my mother quite well, and he was a wizard. Was he really telling the truth? Is this man before me my father? I had never bothered my mother to ask about my father. I always thought that if she wanted me to know who he was, she would have told me. All she said was that He was an awful man and he deceived and abandoned her, and so I asked, "Why did you leave my mother?" Chapter 15, The Truth to Why Did You Leave My Mother? I voiced out, though it felt like it choked me in my throat. Was I going to cry? Was I really going to cry in front of this stranger? Was I? But he does the unexpected. He burst out into a fit of laughter. I stepped back completely stunned as I watched my alleged father laugh out like a maniac, a complete and twisted madman. Then he stops abruptly and his face returns to his emotionals as expression. "Forgive me, my child, but your question is quite funny, at least to me. I did not leave your mother. Your mother killed me," he revealed. What? My eyes widened, almost threatening to pop out of its sockets. This had to be a sick joke. He was lying, right? My mother would never do that. She was abandoned by my father. She could not have possibly killed a wizard. A pure wizard was not easy to kill, especially by a werewolf with no ranking. "You are lying. I will not stand here and fall for your lies and deceits," I said boldly. He needed to see that my opinions of my beloved mother was strong, and it would remain strong regardless of the cock and bull story he was trying to create to deceive me. He chuckles. "I see. She got to you too. She got indeed good at what she does," he responded. "My mother was a good woman, but you treated her badly. You abandoned her, knowing fully well that she carried your child in her wombs, that she would be ostracized by her true mate and her pack. You let her suffer." My voice was almost at its loudest. "This strange man would not break me, will not ruin the good memories I cherished with my mother. My mother loved me with all her heart, Tabby. She would give anything to protect me at all cost." He grabbed me by my right hand, pulling against it. I shrieked, but I could not get out of his grasp. "What are you doing?" "Let me go. You and H and me this minute, you vagabond," I warned, but he wasn't moving. My words had fallen to deaf ears. The next thing, a black door appeared and he opened it just by waving his hand. There was a dark abyss as I looked through the door as he was pulling me towards it. I dragged my feet against the ground, resisting him, but all my efforts was proving fruitless, and he continued to drag me until we entered into the door, and I let out a loud scream in despair. "You can open your eyes now," I hear my alleged father say sternly, almost sounding like a command. I had no idea my eyes were shut close in the first place. As I opened my eyes, I found myself inside an old tent. Real animal fur was placed in the wall of the tent. There was a sort of incense. In a sight I could not fully describe, and then my young parents appear before an old woman. They were holding hands tightly. It is not easy to severe a bond the moon goddess has made. The witches are not meant to interfere with it. We know our limits most of the time, the old woman said as she adjusted her worn-out dress. Her gray hair was in several braids that appeared intact. "I am with child," my mother said sadly. She sounded as though she was about to cry. She really loved my father, the same man that later abandoned her, and he was now degrading her name. I remain where I stand. "My mother loved you with all her heart, but you didn't," I said with a frown on my face, yet I refused to look at him in the eyes. "Watch," he gritted, anger laced in it. I sighed before turning my focus back at the image before me. I know, she responded dryly, unfazed by my mother's revelation. "I can feel the offspring essence. It is a child that was not meant to be. She's an abomination. Your soul is tied to another, yet you choose to defile your spirit with my kind," she added. It was obvious that she was not pleased with what was happening. "Do not speak to her that way." My young alleged father banging his fist on the carpet of the tent. The old woman burst out into laughter. "You can love her now, but you will also watch her die. Their kind do not have our blessing," she said when she ended her laughter. "That is not a blessing. I would prefer to die as long as we get to spend our remaining days together," my young father said. My head immediately snapped in the direction of the father standing by my side. I could not believe it. There was a softness in his eyes now as I looked at him. He really did care for my mother. Why would my mother lie to me then? What happened between them? "You do not want your gift. You want to lose your essence and grow old and die. I did it once, and I can assure you that I regret it each passing day," the old woman said. That would explain why she was aged. I have never met an aged witch or wizard. They all seemed to be frozen in a time their essence dictates, but none appeared older than 40 years old. I will not regret it because this is the right choice, my young father stated boldly. My love, are you sure? My young mother sounded worried. He then placed a kiss on her lips before saying absolutely. I see the choice has been made then, the old woman said. Yes, my young father responded. The old woman stood up and walked before him and placed her hand in his temple, and the room began to shake. My father's body began to shake as his eyes rolled to the back of his head. He lets out a lengthy scream before falling to the ground with a loud thud. It is done, the old woman said, and my mother rushed over to my father's body. Taking him into her embrace, do not worry, he will wake up in time, she responded, and a bottle with a purple potion appeared in her hands. What is that? My mother asked. Her eyes shone with curiosity. It is his essence. You see, this spell cannot be done by just any witch. I am the only one in the coven that can do it because I created the spell and I practiced it on me, all because of love, she said, laughing at the end of her statement. It is quite funny what we are willing to do all because of love. My love still abandoned me after my sacrifice. Now I will gain my essence back, she added. What do you mean? My mother asked. The old woman chuckled. My body can receive his essence and my youth will be restored. Oh. My mother muttered. I will be right back. We still have to break the ties between your true mate and you, the old woman said as she dropped the bottle on the table and walked out of the tent. My mother picked up the bottle as she stared intensely at the liquid, and she does something that completely shook me. She opened it and drank the entire bottle. Her eyes glowed in purple luminescence and her body shook before she let out a loud growl, like her wolf was fighting for its life. And then her body stilled. Her face created a smirk and she pulled out a knife from her dress and she drove a knife through my father's chest, and I froze up. What have you done? The old woman lets out a gasp as she entered the room, stunning to see my mother as she got up from the ground, a wide smile on her face. My mother killed my father. That was the only statement that screamed in my mind, and it felt like my head was spinning and my world was crumbling around me, and the only thing I could do at that moment was let out a scream. Chapter 16, Betrayal. The image of my mother driving a knife through my father's chest immediately fades away, and we were back to the hall. My father took a seat on his throne once more. It is quite devastating, is it not? He said straightforwardly. I composed myself though my heart bled. The betrayal was eating me too deep. It felt like a dream. It felt like a lie, but deep down I knew it was not. But why would my mother do this? It made no sense. This had to be a lie. This is a lie, I said confidently. I have to defend her honor. My mother could not deceive me this way. She loved me too much to lie to me about my father. This was a cohort made by this invader before me. He hissed. His face contorted into a frown. You want it to be a lie, so you try to convince yourself as such, he added, chuckling. My mother was not a witch. I would have known that, I defended. She wasn't. At least at that time. He stood up from his throne. You see, your mother consumed my essence, but what she did not know was that since she was a werewolf beforehand and she would not be able to use my powers until she dies. But she was not aware at that time. Perhaps she would have done things differently. My coven is quite different from the other witches' coven. My family is exceptionally strong. Our essence is stronger, and it was what lured your mother. Perhaps I had revealed too much to her that I should have. I was simply blinded by love. I should have known better. Werewolves are tricky creatures, always trying to be dominant. What do you mean by until she dies? I was utterly confused. It made no sense at all to me. Your mother resurrected back as a witch when she died as a werewolf, but alone she has been weak for a while. She did not consume my essence completely. That essence was shared with someone else. And that someone else is you, and you took a greater share. Magic is mostly drawn towards pure souls, and there is no purer soul than the one of an innocent child, he revealed. I staggered. My legs turned weak immediately. I chuckled for a second or two, trying to comprehend his revelation. This was a sick joke. It had to be. I wish this was a joke, he said, as though he was reading my mind. You have my essence in you. That is why I was able to reach out to you, he added. There is no proof of that. This might all be an evil plot and you might not even be my father, I stated boldly. I refused to back down. I refused to be manipulated by a man I knew completely nothing about. Why did he not show up earlier when I got sucked into this world for the first time? When my powers were drained out of me by force? When those ghastly creatures attacked me? Of course, he simply responded. He got up from his seat and strode over to me. He grabbed my arm, and before I knew it, he slit my skin and blood streamed down, and he did the same to him. I know this magic. Before there was the human science, which is used it to confirm parentage. The white glow proved family relationship, while a red glow proved no relationship. I can assure you this is real. This is not the physical realm, but the mark will remain on your arm when you wake up, and it will disappear after some minutes for confirmation. I am able to access a bit of my power through you, he says, and he starts chanting the spells. I was exceptionally eager to know the outcome of the spell. It felt like a century as I watched him chant until he stopped, and in seconds there it was. The white glow. The proof that he was telling the truth. I sat on the floor, resting my back against one of the pillars in the hall, feeling completely defeated. My father had returned to his seat and he was watching me intensely. I wanted answers, but this was not exactly the answer I wanted. Instead, it brought forth more questions. It ruined all the good memories I have with my mother. It ruined everything I had known my entire life. My father never abandoned us like I was made to believe. He wasn't the evil man like she painted him to be. Or maybe to her he was evil. Maybe she hates the fact that she could not use his powers, so she chose to hate him instead, and she passed on that hate to me, her own child. I can sit here and weep for the betrayal caused by my mother, but I had other things to figure out. There were still the fact that I was connected to this world, despite the fact that Williams and his plagued wolves have been destroyed. It was clear that it had nothing to do with the plagued wolves, but why me? I stood up from the ground. Summoning my strength, I need answers, I stated boldly. It hurts that we could not have met under different circumstances. Maybe I would have given him a hug and tell him how much I missed him, but I couldn't do that. This man might be my father, but I knew nothing about him. I will help as best as I can, he responded. Why am I here? I asked why me and why this world. I added. He sighs. Your mother brought you here, he confessed. You wants to take the remaining essence, and she has some other witches working with her, and that is why she is able to take major control of this realm, and by drawing you, it is much easier to drain your essence than in the physical world. You have seen those creatures with your own eyes. I am certain you have witnessed what they can do. I stumbled back at his revelation. Is she here right now? I could not help but stutter no. She isn't. A wizard of hers just passed away. His name is Williams. The Black Coven will mourn his soul. He is like you. A half-blooded. Is a tragedy that he became a pawn in her sick game, he said. Regardless, that is not the issue here, my child. If your mother gets the essence from you, you will die. And that was the statement that completely turned my world upside down. What? My mother is trying to kill me, I muttered, trying to convince myself that I had heard wrong. Yes, if she doesn't, she will die, and this time it will be forever, he explained. But why would any of the witches want to help her? She was a werewolf in the past. Witches do not willingly help a werewolf, I had to ask. It made absolutely no sense to me. She had managed to tell them a false story, like the one she told you. She sought out the help of the Black Coven. They are known for avenging their witches, ABS wizards they thought to be wrongfully killed. She made them believe that the werewolves killed me and cast her out when she was with child and before I died. I had willingly given her my essence. She wants revenge on the werewolves while she succeeds in raining the remaining essence from you. She is very strong now thanks to them, but it is only temporary. She is working on borrowed power, he revealed. I was completely and utter dumbfounded. I felt this sudden sickness in my belly, this certain disgust for the woman I had once cherished deeply. My mother that was now out to snatch my life from me. How do you know all this? Maybe you are wrong. My mother cannot do that. How are you sure of all this? I know this, because a part of me is still inside her. And that is how I know that she is coming this very minute. He breathed and I completely froze up. Chapter 17. Alive. The door of the hall flew wide open and there she was. My mother, the one that was meant to have ceased to exist. She strode into the halls adorned in a dark cloak with the hood down. It had been years since I last saw her. I vividly remember when she breathed her last. I watched as her frail eyes closed and her wrinkled hand dropped, losing life. She laid on my laps while I wept bitterly for her death. But here she was, alive and young, just like when she had consumed my father's essence. I wanted to run up to her and pull her into my body and tell her how much I had missed her, how much I struggled after she left me in this world, how much I prayed for her spirit and our happiness in the afterlife, but I was the fool. She was here all this while, well and alive. She walked over to me and stared at me right in the face while I was too stunned that I became motionless. "You look as beautiful as ever, my dear child," she smiled at me. Though her face was beautiful and flawless, all I saw was deceit and the evil behind her eyes. To think we shared quite a resemblance annoyed me the most. How was this my mother? How was this the mother that had raised me? How was this the same woman I was ready to trade everything for? It felt pathetic to think that I had once pleaded with the moon goddess to preserve my mother. It felt pathetic that I had once defended her. "You will not greet your mother. We have not seen each other in almost for centuries. I have missed you greatly," she added, and immediately I felt nauseous. Her words make me feel disgusted. This was not the physical realm, but I was able to feel everything I would normally feel if I was in the real world. "You are indeed alive and young," I managed to say. Her face instantly contorted into a wide smile. "Young. Young, it feels good to be young again," she said. Her facial expression still remained. She looked psychotic and deranged. Or was I being too quick to judge? Was my decision being influenced by my father? "I cried for you when you passed. I prayed for your spirit. I asked the moon goddess to grant you peace because I thought you had suffered because of my father's mistake. Why?" She chuckled before erupting out into a fit of laughter, cutting me off. She laughed like a deranged woman for seconds before stopping abruptly, and a cold expression soon took over her face. "I never knew you were pathetic," she chuckles. I got at her, completely dumbfounded. "You begged the moon goddess for my happiness. You are really a good daughter." "But I guess you are not a good mother," I cut her off, responding stoically. She appeared a bit stunned by my confidence for a second before her face returned to its previous appearance. "I care for you. Did I not?" she said, caressing my arms. I pushed her hand away from my body. She frowned at my actions. She turned over to my father, retaining the frown in her face. "I see you have told her the full story," she gritted against her teeth. "She has a right to know how I love a woman you were," and still as he spat out. She gave him a sadistic smile before she settled her face with a frown. She waved her hands, and immediately my father is pulled from across the room, and she held him by the neck, squeezing the whatever was left of him. "Oh, how nice it would be if I could kill you again," she spat, and my heart broke. My mother was really that evil. She really did kill my father. Oh well. "At least I can enjoy seeing you in pain," she added as she squeezed harder. My father released grunts in pain. "Let him go. Let him go," I demanded strongly. It pained me to watch him in pain. He was the good person. He was only a victim of my mother, but why? "Why did you do all this? What did my father ever do to you than love you?" She chuckles. "You know, my dear child, this world is simply for the strong and not for the weak. I watched how my parents were treated because they had no ranking, that I could not allow myself go through that kind of pain, though I must admit that there was once a time when I really did feel something for you, Alexander, but my hunger for power was greater than whatever I felt for you. Though there was a lot of things that happened that I never expected to ever happen, like getting bonded with the Alpha Sun at that time. You see, I was always meant to have power, but my impatience got the best of me. Maybe I might have been happy if I had just followed the course of things. Well, there is always a price to everything in life. You told me that you were raped." I yelled out in anger, and she tightened the hold she had on my father's neck. "I do not think it would have normal to inform my child that our father was dead and I killed him. That would have been too traumatic. I do love you in my own way," she responded coldly. "Yet you sought to kill me now," I spat. "Like I said, there is always a price for everything, and you have lived for over 5 centuries. That is just being greedy, my dear. Does not change the fact that I love you, and I will always will," she answered, and before I could respond back to her, she squeezed my father's neck tightly. I managed to hear him say, "Don't give up easily." It was barely a whisper, he fades away, and then he was gone. "Alexander is indeed a good man," she smirked, and she turns her attention on me. She held me by the neck before I could react. She had already tightened her hold on me. I struggled against her hold. My lungs felt constricted. I was shaking against her hold, kicking my legs, while it felt like life was being sucked out of me. She was incredibly strong. I never imagined that. Well, I never imagined I would meet my mother under the circumstances. She stared at me without a single emotion in her eyes. I summoned whatever strength I had and pushed her off. She flew across the room, but she landed perfectly. I was struggling for air to think this was not the physical realm yet. I could feel everything I would normally feel if I was in the real world. "I see you still have some strength in you," she chuckles. "I will love to stay and do this dance with you, my dear daughter, but I don't have the time," she added. "Me neither." I snapped. I waved my hands trying to use my magic, but it was fruitless. She burst out into laughter. "I control this world, my sweet child," she smirked, and she waved her hands, and just like that, those ghastly creatures appeared, violently rushing over to me. And then it began. I feel like my powers was being sucked out of my body. My mother comes up to me smiling widely. "I wish things could have gone differently, my dear child," she said, caressing my cheeks, and she placed a kiss on my temple. "Sleep now, my child," she said, and that was it. I was gone. Chapter 18, The Moon Goddess. There was white background around me, and it was like I was trapped in a void of nothingness with no sense of time and space. At least it was not dark. Was this what death felt like? Was this the afterlife? This nothingness? My mother really succeeded, and I failed miserably. I could not even put up a good fight. The once feared werewolf priestess reduced to nothing. And then, the brightest light I have ever seen in my entire existence came forth, blinding me totally. I tried shielding my eyes with my hands, but it was useless. The intensity of the light felt choking. I shut my eyes close, the tightest that I could, for as longer as I comprehended, and then there was this soft voice. "You can open your eyes now." The voice sounded like a lullaby. Soothing and calm, and I complied, but slowly. When my eyes was totally open, everywhere was like a landscape, only it was magical. There were beautiful beings flying in the sky, and everywhere was so colorful, and then I noticed the woman smiling at me. My breath hitched at the sight of her. She was dressed in a silvery white flowing dresses, her white hair adorned with flowers and silver accessories. She was looked out of this world. Her beauty was incomparable. It would bring any man to their feet, and maybe a few ladies would be swayed as well, or rather die of jealousy. "We finally meet," she said in her sing-song voice. I blinked at her words. "Do I know you?" "Where am I?" I questioned softly. "You have known me your whole life. You have served me well greatly," she smiled. My eyes widened at the revelation of her words. "The Moon Goddess?" I asked, completely dumbfounded. She nodded in confirmation of my question. "You are right, child," she smiled. "You are in the abyss. An abyss I created for you. You are dying," she added. "I thought you would look a bit different," I muttered under my breath, but I know that she heard me. I had imagined that I was already dead. "You would have been if not for Reed, your mate," she revealed. My eyes widened at her words. "But I thought my kind would never got one. I thought my mother might have been responsible to confuse me," I said, still trying to make sense of everything. "Reed was indeed my mate. Reed was indeed my mate." Those words continually changed in my head. "Your kind is destined not to get one, but I bend the rules for you. Because you are different and you have served me diligently. The bond glows blue because it is the first of its kind. I am aware you sought out those answers early on, but I could not reveal anything to you until you found out the entire truth. There is a time for everything, and now is the time," she explains. "Your mother will wage war on the werewolves, and a lot of my people will cherish at her hands." What do I do?" I asked eagerly. "There is not much you can do. You have lost the essence that was in you, but that essence did not belong to you in the first place," she said. "I know," I muttered under my breath. It just reminded of how I had had a part of my father all this while, but I had despised him a lot when it was his power I had been using. I remember his last words. He said to me, "Don't give up easily. Do not be discouraged, Althea. You have been using your father's essence all this while, but that does not mean that you do not have your own essence. Though it would have been a difficult task to face a full-born witch, but your power has been sitting inside of you for over 500 years. It has had the time to grow exponentially more than you can imagine, but it would be difficult for you to use, or maybe impossible, she says. How do I learn to use my power then? I asked. She gave a soft smile. You have to figure that on your own, dear, but now I can only help restore you back to your body. As weak and damaged, it will take time for you to awaken. Be ready. Be strong, Althea. War is coming, she said. She waved her hand and the atmosphere began to shift weight. Back, Spidey, my fated mate. White splashed around me and the wind spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. Back, Spidey, my fated mate. White splashed around me and the wind spun with the beat of the heavy techno music the DJ was playing. I called out, but she disappeared, and I am back to the nothingness, only this time it is dark. Not pitch black, but just like the night. I am floating in the air. My body feels light and peaceful, and I close my eyes. What is wrong with her? I hear a voice ask desperately. It was Reed. It sounded as though he was about to cry, and my heart broke. I cannot reach out to him. Here's my mate. He was my better half, and he believed in that before I did. Before I got the confirmation, because he believed in me. I am trying all I can. It is difficult to feel life in her. Tomorrow voice echoes in the nothingness. I fear she is dying, Reed, she added in a sad tone. No, she is not dying. She cannot die. She is my mate. Reed yells, fills the void. His agony eat deep inside of me that I do not know when I was crying until I see the drop of tears floating upward. Mistress will be fine, Reed. She's a strong woman. It was via voice, and that was all I heard, and the nothingness takes over again. I hope you fighting in there, Althea, Reed says, and I smile. If only he knew that I was in a sleep-like state. I have to take you on a real date. I do not think you have had to do that in the 500 years since you have been in this world. It is funny, right? You are kind of older than my grandparents, yet you look older than I am. So beautiful and fierce, he added, chuckling at the end. Who would have thought it would take you to be in this state for you to actually listen to me and not argue about us not being true mates, he says. I could almost picture the smile on his face as he said those words. Reed was a good man, a good mate, and I, on the other hand, felt undeserving of him. He was too good for me. Why does he have to go through this kind of life just because he had been fated with me? I was grateful to the moon goddess for this gift, but equally I felt like a burden to Reed. I am a burden to Reed. And then I feel a sharp pain in my chest, like hundreds of bodies were resting on my heart, and then I began to shake. No. I hear Reed scream violently, and several voices echoed in the background, and then the excruciating pain once more. I scream out, gnashing my teeth against each other. I feel like my heart is tearing into pieces, and then it stops. Althea. Althea. It sounded like Reed was crying, and then my eyes shut right open, and I was gasping from air. Reed stared at me, his eyes wide open. You are alive, he breathed. Stay tuned for more Werewolf Witch adventures. Subscribe.